Hey there, Riverland College and Long Prairie Gray Eagle, a high school that is now teaching and learning remotely. Sorry to hear that. That seems to be the way of things across the state and across the country as we get punched in the head a second time by this nutty virus. I'm going to be looking a few times at this little thing here because I'm shooting a video probably at a non-ideal time with the sun going down. And if I get all dark or too light, I'll have to jump up and adjust that. So don't worry about that. Good to see you. Got a few things before you, a couple of prelude type observations. I had a serious mystery solved for me, not a serious mystery, a tiny mystery solved for me yesterday before my classes started in the morning, my live Zoom. I've been hearing behind my glass porch here this doink, doink, doink on metal, and I was like, wow, is that on my old boiler or what's going on out there? Well, yesterday, I finally solved the mystery. I put on my boots and I kind of went out behind around my house. And sure enough, my suspicion was correct, although it had never happened before. I have an evaporator out here that I cook maple sap with in the spring. And there was a little cardinal, a male, a young one, probably born this spring, astonished at his own reflection. And there's a little lip there. And this cardinal for days has just been jumping on that lip and beaking, hitting his beak against his own reflection. He thinks it's another bird mistakenly, and I think that's a good story. We're all thinking, of course, about the birds we're putting in our oven next week for Thanksgiving, and I don't know what's going on down there or up in Long Prairie Gray Eagle, but I know we're supposed to kind of lay low and have small gatherings, and we're going to try to have a Thanksgiving dinner here. I'm going to open up the windows, get the boiler going, and have my sons come with their girls, and have a briefer Thanksgiving. I won't set a table. We'll just kind of sit in our chairs and get some fresh air in here and try to enjoy each other's company. Christmas, it'll probably just be my beloved wife and I. It'll be quieter and smaller so we can stay safe. And Valerie and any moms in this class, actually all of you, I'm thinking of having a cooking edition of this class next week. I just might prove to you that I'm the best cook at my college. And I'm going to brine my turkey this year in buttermilk, man. I got a New York Times recipe that I'm going to be dithering with in a big way. And I'm excited about that. I want to talk to you about something sad to get going today. It's going to be a long lead up to a poem that I want to read you. I also want to tell you three things about F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. And I also want to cover a pretty serious problem that this novel puts before us, which is something called anti-Semitism. I'm sure you're familiar with what that means. And I'd love to discuss it with you, but I can only, point things out in this mode of delivery. So here's what I want to tell you to begin with. One of the many traditions that is forbidden to me right now has to do with something I've done for a long time, not just at Central Lakes College, earlier than that. Basically, early in the semester, I come in, I've got a pile of envelopes and paper, and I distribute it. And I just get some beautiful, thoughtful music going, and I have my students write themselves letters. Not interpersonally, but intrapersonally. Intra means self, addressing self about self. And I say, okay, look, just take a moment now. Write yourself a letter. You're going to get this back on the last day of school. Of the semester when we have a minor exam, and I'll play the mailman, and it'll be Christmas time, and you'll forget that you did this, and tell yourself something important, maybe something small that you don't want to forget about the day. Maybe give yourself some advice, and there's always students that give themselves money, right? And it's always wonderful. It's a great way to end the semester. Kids save these letters. Students save them forever, sometimes. And it's always sad on that day, too, because as I play the mailman, there's always 2 or 3 letters that can't be delivered because the students have likely vanished. Sometimes people just disappear at a state college. I think my classes are easy. You might disagree, but in the end, it ends up pretty well for most people. But a few years, I don't tend to open those either. It feels like some kind of breach of something. And I remember a few years ago, I had a student who wasn't there on the last day, young man. And I almost said something there, but I'm not, and going to say that. Okay, he wasn't very pleasant. I loved him anyway. And I opened up his letter. Why did I do that? Usually I just toss them. But I opened it up and he had just written one sentence, not even a full sentence. And it was, it was this: F religion, science rules. I shrugged my shoulders. There are people that are like that are really into science and math, and that's great. More accurately, there are some people who think that the only way that you can acquire knowledge is empirically, through the senses. Like, they don't believe it unless they can see it, hear it, touch it, and know it that way. And I've been, yesterday I talked for a while, and I'm saying the same thing here, about the idea that I believe that's important, but I also believe that you can acquire knowledge in different ways, maybe through a hunch, through intuition. You've heard me think like this before. For me, clairvoyance has gotten more profound as I've gotten older. It's almost like a side effect, a consequence of being middle-aged. The phone will ring and I'll know it's my mom. Well, there's not that many people that call me, believe it or not, so maybe that's no big deal. I guess what I'm trying to communicate to you is something stronger. I'll get a feeling that I know something, and it doesn't usually take very long for me to find out that I was right. And sometimes these moments are hard. About 4 years ago, as an example, and I've got two of them, we heard here in central Minnesota that they found a body in the woods at St. John's, and everybody got spooked by that. Everybody around here knows those woods. My old life, which I still love, that school, St. John's, St. Ben's, my old high school, is surrounded by 2,800 acres of just absolutely gorgeous, rolling, heavy woods, hardwoods, man. And pine trees too, planted by novice monks in the late 1800s. When I heard that a body was found in the woods, I instantly thought, I'm going to know who that person is. This is going to touch my life. And sure enough, it was a long ago student of mine named Rita Berg, who went to the St. John's Woods and took her own life. And I was just heartbroken about that. I taught Rita across her sophomore year. She was my AP English student. On Facebook, there's the strangeness of Facebook. I could see that her life wasn't going that great. She had tried marriage, that didn't work out. She had tried a career as a lawyer, but she kind of sucked at it. And you could see that she had abandoned the traditions that she was born into faith-wise and was just trying out every possible thing under the sun to be well. A lot of New Age stuff, and if you're interested in that, that's great. But she was, doing crystals and yoga and Tai Chi, and I could see that she had gone to Hawaii. She had written a couple of bad books too, and she wanted me to blurb one of them, and I just couldn't because it was really poorly written. And she went to Hawaii and spent a lot of money, gave some kind of healer, some kind of yogi, a whole bunch of money up in the mountains of Oahu, and came home, and that was it. She just gave in to despair. I cut a class. I got a partial administrative day of leave off to get to that funeral. I talked to her mom for half an hour about my theories about her, and her mom said I was just dead on. As hard was, and maybe you remember this happening, 11 months ago, we had a Black Hawk helicopter go down near Kimball, which is not far from here, and 3 National Guard troops died in that. And when I saw that on Minnesota Public Radio, I thought, I'm going to know one of those guys. I just know it. That feeling, which is never wrong. Don't get it too often, thank God. But I was certain I would know somebody, and sure enough, I found out pretty quickly. It was one of my students, Court Plantenberg. How does that work? Those 3 guys were deployed in Iraq, in Afghanistan. People were shooting at them. And then they die in a flaming wreck, helicopter crash in Kimball, Minnesota, where there's a general lack of flak. There's not a lot of anti-aircraft guns going on there. So let me read a poem in honor of Court Plantenberg. And the story of this is really quick. In 1970, the great poet Charles Simic had a chance to meet Richard Hugo, who was elderly. Simic was young. Simic, you'll remember I hosted him in 2014, and they met in San Francisco, and they were at a poet convention, and there was a paper tablecloth on this 4x8 table that they were sitting at, and they were meeting for the first time. Simic mentioned to Hugo that he had been in Belgrade, Yugoslavia the week before, but he didn't tell him he was Yugoslavian. And the minute he said that, Hugo starts drawing out the town, the bridges, the banks, the churches, and Simic looked down and realized that his hometown was being drawn before his very eyes, and he said, "How is it that you know Belgrade so well?" And Hugo said, "You know what? I bombed it a few times. I was a bombardier during World War II." Simic said, When I was a little boy, I was there. You were bombing me until I was 5 years old. When we got out of there and got to Chicago, Hugo felt terrible. And Simic tried to palliate his sadness over the idea of that he had bombed Simic's town and maybe could have killed him. And, well, Hugo felt so bad about it that he just had to go write this poem called Letter to Simic from Boulder. Dear Charles, and so we meet once in San Francisco, and I learn I bombed you long ago in Belgrade when you were 5. I remember. We were after a bridge on the Danube, hoping to cut the German armies off as they fled north from Greece. We missed. Not unusual, considering I was one of the bombardiers. I couldn't hit my ass if I sat on the Norden or wrote a bomb down singing the Star-Spangled Banner. I remember Belgrade opened like a rose when we came in. Not much flack. I didn't know about the daily hangings, the 80,000 Slav who dangled from German ropes in the city. Lessons to the rest. I was interested mainly in staying alive that moment. The plane jumped free from the weight of the bombs, and we went home. What did you speak then? Serb, I suppose. And what did your mind do with the terrible howl of bombs? What is Serb for fear? It must be the same as in English. One long, primitive wail of dying children. One child, fixed forever in dead stare. I don't apologize for the war, or what I was. I was willingly confused by the times. I believed in heroics for others, not for me. I believed the necessity of that suffering world, hoping it would learn not to do it again. But I was young. The world never learns. History has a way of making the past palatable, the dead a dream. Dear Charles, I'm glad you avoided the bombs, that you live with us now and write poems. I must tell you, though, I felt funny that day in San Francisco. I kept saying to myself, he was on the ground that day. The sky, eerie mustard, and our engines roaring everything out of the way. And the world comes clean in moments like that for survivors. The world comes clean as clouds in summer, the pure puffed white. Soft birds careening in and out. Our lives with a chance to drift on slow over the world. Our Bombay's empty, the target forgotten, the enemy ignored. Nice to meet you finally, after all the mindless hate. Next time, if you want to be sure you survive, sit on the bridge I'm trying to hit and wave. I'm coming in on course, but nervous, and my crosshairs flutter. Wherever you are on Earth, you are safe. I'm aiming, but my bombs are candy, and I've lost the lead plane. Your friend, Dick. That's a great poem. And I can see that my light levels, holy cow, I better take a picture of that sunset for you. Well, now the light levels aren't so bad. Guess I'll have to decide here. Never mind, I got an even better photograph of a sunset that I'll send your way in a moment when I edit this. Well, here, what do I want to talk to you about? There's 3 things that I want to tell you about The Great Gatsby. And this is stuff that you might not be that interested in, but why not communicate to you as full an understanding as I possibly can. I asked my high school students who had read The Great Gatsby in Brainerd last week if their high school English teachers had said any of this stuff, and no. And I'm not throwing them under a bus. I don't know more than they do, but I still covered stuff that they hadn't heard about before. Okay, thing 1. The cover is a big deal, you guys, okay? This cover was made by a very famous artist. And here's what's interesting. I told my students yesterday in live Zoom, pick up the cover. Notice anything about the eyes? They hadn't noticed that in each little pupil, there's a little naked lady sort of just kind of relaxing. The artist that did that, Ducat is his name, it's the only novel that he ever illustrated. And I think it's really important, it's obvious, right? If you're going to make a novel, and it's a product, it's something you want to sell commercially, you want people to buy it. And a lot of thought goes into what the cover should look like, what the back should look like, what the title is. I got a friend of mine that's making a beautiful album. He's a professional jazz musician that's about a recording of some poetry from the 20s. And he wanted me to play guitar on that album, but I'm not going to go to a St. Paul studio in a pandemic. And he's been running the cover by me, showing it to me. I didn't tell my 9 and 10 o'clock people about that. But here's what's interesting to me. Fitzgerald and Perkins saw this cover in the works before the novel was finished. And Fitzgerald was so freaked out by it with joy that it affected the novel, it affected the writing. For instance, the eyes of T.J. Eckelberg on that dilapidated billboard, they weren't part of the novel until he saw that cover. And elsewhere in the novel, the eyes of Daisy Buchanan are sort of described as floating, detached above the city of New York. And that is that cover that influenced him. And until I found this website yesterday, the Museum of American Literature, I had not seen the mock-up drawings that this artist created for it. Second thing I want to tell you, number 2, Fitzgerald and Perkins had some serious disagreements about what The Great Gatsby should be called, title-wise. For a while, Fitzgerald truly wanted to call it Among the Ashes and the Millionaires. Ash Heaps and the Millionaires. Perkins didn't like that at Scribner's in New York. Scribner's always insisted, we're going to call this novel The Great Gatsby. That's the only name for it. There's another moment where Fitzgerald wanted to call the novel Trimalcio's Party. Who's Trimalcio, you might notice. And actually that's on some of the title pages of the novel, like as the alternate title after the colon. Well, because I have kind of a classical education, I know who Trimalcio was. Trimalcio is a character in kind of like a pre-novel, a proto-novel, written by a guy who I think was kind of a jerk, Petronius, who worked in the court of the Emperor Nero, who was a nut. So crazy that he made one of his horses a proconsul. That's like a general. I mean, that guy was like crazy with a capital C. And for a while, Petronius had this fantastic job title called the Minister of Taste, and he wrote this story about this rhetorician who just kind of roamed around Rome, going to parties. And there are some pretty hellacious parties in The Great Gatsby, and one of them gets completely out of hand. And I hope you go easy on that, all you young ones, the partying scene. So it's interesting to know that Fitzgerald was thinking about Rome, thinking about the idea of the United States as an empire, and probably thinking about the idea that life can corrupt you. And I hope you don't let that happen. So that's thing number 2. Thing number 3 is a little bit sad to me, and it's a fact. F. Scott Fitzgerald wanted to be wealthy. I asked my live Zoom kids yesterday, how many of you want to be wealthy? A lot of hands went up in the air in the little Brady Bunch squares. And I told them, I asked one kid specifically, what would you do if you got wealthy? And Eli said, I would just probably blow it on all kinds of stuff. I told my students yesterday, I don't buy lottery tickets because I'm so lucky. I know I would win and the money would destroy me. So why allow that to happen? Well, that's what Fitzgerald wanted. He wanted to be a millionaire. He wanted to be wealthy. And it didn't happen until after he was dead. Here's what's sad. You probably know that novels, all books are printed in editions, right? So the first book, the first edition is a big deal. I have a copy in my study. I'm looking through the window there at it. I have a first edition of an Ernest Hemingway novel. It's not important what the title is. It's slipping my mind right now. It's worth probably $800 or $900. They can be, collector items. And then when the books are all sold, then there's a second edition and a third edition and a fourth. Well, Scribner's came out swinging with The Great Gatsby. They printed 20,000 copies. They didn't sell. America wasn't interested. And here's kind of a sad thing to me, but it's just a fact. When books don't sell, something happens called the remaindering. They get remaindered. And they get gathered up and they're taken back to the publishing house and they're put in these giant vats. Just think like mega big egg beaters. And they pour in chemicals and the beaters and water. And the beaters stir things around until something called a slurry is made. And then the books that didn't sell are turned into other books. I feel like I should adjust my light here a little bit. Well, I suppose I look exactly the same. It's possible I've taken up videography too late in life, and but Aiden Packard, my biggest fan, at least in my videos, I know you forgive this, Aiden. So anyway, so what happened? The books get remaindered, they get turned into other books. Fitzgerald goes face down in the typewriter at the age of 44, and then when he's dead, America goes, hey, wait a minute, this is a great American novel. Tens of millions of copies sold. It's called Posthumous Wealth and Posthumous Fame. And you can't spend it when you're dead. So I told that kid I teased yesterday who wants to be a millionaire, be sure to make all your money while you're alive. And it's just kind of a thing to think about with Fitzgerald. I got one more thing I want to put before you. Put my glasses down and put my book down. I serve an institution called literature, okay? Institutions historically have their problems. Among them is misogyny and racism. I've said before, I'm not going to go to a protest, and hold a sign, but I will host a poetry reading to help an ethnic group in Minnesota, and get them books too. But and I will use literature as a teacher to help broaden our understanding of differences and the need to celebrate and love each other no matter who we are or what we are. We got to try to make that effort, but I got to put this before you. Literature is sometimes misogynist as an institution. Misogyny is a word that stands for a guy who hates women. Dudes, you don't ever want to be accused of misogyny. That would be bad. Literature also is occasionally, actually a lot, racist. Historically, it's racist. And I'm here thinking of a particular group that I really admire, an ethnic group. And those are our brothers and sisters who are Jewish, okay? My Savior was Jewish, so I kind of relate to them and I kind of identify with them. But it's really important for me to say something that you may not know. Literature and history have punched the great Jewish people in the head for a really long time, and I think we should knock it off. Although anti-Semitism, planet-wide, making a huge comeback. It's frightening what's happening in the United States. A lot of people hate Israel, a lot of people hate the Jews, and I smell war coming there. I think Israel's getting ready to attack Iran, but that's me being political, when I promised I wouldn't be political. Facing facts, the Jews are at once an ethnicity and a great religion, and they have lasted thousands and thousands of years, and just, always going into exile and being punished and rewarded alternately depending upon how they're behaving. But let's concentrate on literature a little bit. We don't need to go over how they were portrayed in the Bible, executing Jesus. But when you start ticking through the centuries, it gets rough, okay? In the 1380s, Geoffrey Chaucer wrote a little shop of horrors called The Prioress Tale, which is, it couldn't be more troubling. It's about a little Catholic boy. Chaucer is an Englishman, one of the great English poets, and it's about this little boy who's on his way to church. He's going to Mass, and he's singing a hymn called the Alma Redemptoris Mater, which means O Redeeming Mother. And on the way to church, this Jewish guy sees him and gets angry and cuts his throat and throws him in a sewer. And by way of a miracle, even though his windpipe is cut, that little boy sings all night long until his family comes the next day. And, they take care of that Jewish guy pretty serious, in a serious way. I can, as an addendum to this idea, I can tell you that when I returned to graduate school to finally get my master's degree, I had to re-encounter The Prioress Tale in a class on Chaucer. And I wrote a paper that was so strong that the professor, Glenn Davis, is like, you got to submit this to conferences. And I read that paper at a conference for medievalists in Minneapolis, and I was surrounded by teachers at lunch when I was done. They're like, where's your department? Where do you teach? And I was like, I don't teach anywhere. I just got fired. I'm looking for a piece of chalk. Got any ideas? And that was kind of the scary time. I've lost that paper, and I'm upset about that. Go a little further into the future, we got another Englishman named Christopher Marlowe. Writes a charming little story called The Jew of Malta, which is about a Jew who poisons a well and kills a bunch of nuns. Nice story, Christopher Marlowe, the almost rival of Shakespeare. And Shakespeare picks that up. Those guys were competing for, to be the best playwright in Tudor England. Shakespeare reads that And then what does he do? He writes a story called The Merchant of Venice that has a Jew in it who loans money to this guy who wants to get with this girl, but he doesn't have any dollars rolling around in his pocket. And Shylock says to him, hey, I'll loan you some money, but if you don't pay it back by such and such a date, I'm going to take a pound of flesh. The guy's like, fine. The final scene in court, after the guy doesn't pay him in Act 5, Shylock shows up with a knife because his plan is to cut a pound of flesh out of the guy's butt. That's a rough story, William Shakespeare. What were you thinking? Anti-Semitic story, anti-Semitic writer, who knows? Or were they just pushing our buttons? Now we've arrived at Fitzgerald, and I could give you many, many more examples. Maybe you didn't notice. Maybe in the same way you didn't notice that there's naked ladies in the eyeballs of the pupils of on the cover. Did you notice Myron Wolfsheim? Did you notice his characterization? He's old. He's ugly. He's bald. He's got nose hairs boiling out of his nostrils, not unlike me. And he's a complete criminal who he participated in the Black Sox scandal of 1919. Whoops, he's Jewish. So what do we do with that? What do we do with that? I'm not sitting here telling you that F. Scott Fitzgerald was an anti-Semite, but I am saying that he probably was pushing our buttons and working with stereotype, cliche. The example I brought up yesterday, maybe he was fighting racism. I have no idea. I just heard today that Huckleberry Finn is being banned again across the country because of the N-word. We're getting our undies in a bundle over racial issues. Excuse me, that's a great work of literature. Twain wrote it to push back against racism. Twain loved black folk in the South, his neighbors. He hung out with them all the time. But he's a satirist, so it's tricky. Satire is tricky. I'm drifting a little bit, but let me give you one more example. There's a scene in Huckleberry Finn where there's a terrible steamboat accident. And in real life, in Mark Twain's real life, as Samuel Clemens, he had a brother die in a steamboat accident. He spent days with him in a burn unit in St. Louis. And Twain took that and wove it into the story, because that's what writers do, that's what artists do. They take what happens to them and they turn it into art. And there's a scene in Huckleberry Finn where this guy runs up to a group of people and he says, there's been a terrible steamboat accident on the Mississippi River. And a woman says, really? Was anybody killed? And the boy says, nope, just a nigger. That's Twain messing with us. That was a human being who died in that explosion. I think I'm near the end of what I want to tell you today. Just making sure I had trouble with sound earlier today. Finish The Great Gatsby by tomorrow. A little quiz is going to drop on that. I got some work to do to pull a quiz from Brainerd and get it into Riverland, and there's some kind of quiz adapter thing that I'll probably try out. Or maybe I'll need Sean or Theo down there at Riverland, those sweet guys, to give me a little bit of help. And we're going to move on to another writer, the third of the 4 writers in this unit on the Lost Generation. And that is a guy named William Faulkner. Fitzgerald's readable. Hemingway's readable. Faulkner is going to take some work. I hope you know how to roll up your sleeves, and hope you got some coffee. So keep staying safe and well. And it's getting dark now. Let me get this edited and put together, and then it's time to whip over to St. John's and get this uploaded for you. Love you guys.